Hi, Professor.
Good morning, Megan. How are you? Guess people are still waking up after their Labor Day. Hi, Serene.
Hi, how are you?
You know me, I don't complain much openly.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I pretty
Yes, yes, I will take some of your hair.
it's really messy. We have to show our faces, and I'm just kind of like, oh, but I look really bad.
It's okay.
But I finished the essay, but it's kind of like all over the place. Did you have like a certain like way you wanted us to start talking, or because I don't know how I kind of just it's really messy and it's not the best. Like I mean, I wrote like 3 pages long, but I kind of like just started off saying, "Oh, this happened to me when I was a kid. This happened."
Okay, do you read stories at all? You
Yeah,
like movies?
yeah.
Okay. So how do you like the movies that you really like? How do they start?
Well, the last one I saw was when I was a little bit younger. It started off
Okay.
like, "Oh, back when I was 15 years old, this happened."
Okay, so there was a start,
hmm
right? And then if it was too boring, what did you do?
Made it interesting.
Yeah, or you stopped watching it, right?
Yeah.
So there was a start, but that start has to be enough that it creates an interest.
hmm
And then the mid part is, you know, now what is so significant that I've got to figure out what happened?
Do you want us to make it like a story, or do you want us to be like, "Oh, when I was a child, this happened, and then this is this reason why that I think this way, and this theory
Well,
to relate to it."
well, even that's a story.
Okay.
for now. So the biggest part is just, can you make it interesting?
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll try my best. I'm sorry if I disappoint you.
No, no, no. I will meet you where you are. So don't worry about it. I'm not looking for anything special,
Okay.
right? I'm just looking for something that helps me gain some insight on the kinds of things we're talking about in class.
Okay.
And I can tell you so far, the ones that I have read that have already been turned in are just, I mean, some of them you need a tissue box. I mean, now it's not because they're sad stories,
Mhm.
it's just because they are just so amazing. The stories are so amazing, you know, where people have come from, what they've gone through, what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I would offer that if you were on this side of the table and you were reading some of those stories, you'd be like, oh my God, really? Wow, how could, yeah, some are that good. So yeah, so just tell me your story.
Okay. I will.
Okay. So if you want, when you do your story, you can either write it to
Mhm.
get a Tony Award, or you can write it to get a Golden Globe, or you can write it to get an Oscar.
That's true. I'll try to aim for the high.
Okay. Good morning, Andrew. How are you? Or good afternoon, sorry.
Oh, it is very much morning for me, Professor.
Okay, where are you?
I mean, it's 12:45, but I am exhausted.
Okay.
I
Good morning.
almost didn't wake up for this.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for showing up. So I believe, let's see, we've still got another minute, so we won't start until then. But just as a starting point, we finished chapter 1, right? Quantitative, qualitative research, that kind of stuff. If you remember.
Yeah, we finished, we just finished up chapter 1 last time, and you said we would start chapter 2 today.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because 2 is not that long, but it works, and it gives us an opportunity to maybe even get into chapter 3 today. Again, because 2 is not that long, so we'll play it by ear.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes, please.
You said that when we take our first exam, most of the exam is going to be based on the PowerPoints when we talk about.
95%, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The other 5%, because I want to promote reading, you know, but at the same time, I realize not everyone is a readaholic like me. And so I try to make the majority of the information available to you through the lecture and the PowerPoints, but reserve some to still expand some thinking beyond just what's given. Now it may be a personal predilection, but for classes, I'm not big on people memorizing things. I'd rather they understand them well enough to apply them. And so that's why I don't stick just with the PowerPoints, but I realize, again, not everybody's academically interested as I am. So I'll keep it to the PowerPoints for the majority. Okay, so 12:46. Okay, cool. Let's look at chapter 2. Okay, so prenatal development, pregnancy, and birth. Again, from a developmental perspective, I mean, it's from ground zero. As I said at the very first class, you know, the day that we're born is the day that we start dying. And so the question is, what do we do with it in between? And so, of course, the first part of that is going to involve our genetics, right? And again, I love the analogy, and sometimes it's redundant, but I still just love the idea that if I take, you know, this T and look at the point, the point of that T is probably 100 to 1,000 times larger than an egg cell. And then I didn't let some people in. And then the sperm cell that's used to fertilize the egg is 1,000 times smaller than the egg. You know, so Andrew, just looking at you here, I'm looking at you about 5, 10, 6 feet.
Yeah, 6 feet.
Okay, so think about it. So something smaller than the head of a pin had all of the structural information to create someone to be 6 feet. That is amazing. I mean, we talk about nuclear things and, you know, all of that stuff, but the reality is this, it's a nuclear fusion that happens between an egg cell and a sperm cell that creates an entire human being. And it's just amazing. And every day, and I've been doing this for, 12 years, and I still get amazed at what can happen with us as humans and even animals or plants and those things. So of course, we get 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 chromosomes from dad under our average conditions. And under average conditions, meaning that under the bell curve, the majority of folks without it being a biological or physical disorder, we get 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 from dad. There are instances when we get an extra one, 47. The 47th gene, or chromosome, when it is administered or received, tends to lead to Down syndrome. It's almost a 100% indicator that if there are 47 chromosomes instead of the 46, it is most often going to lead to Down syndrome. Now, other instances can affect, right, the blueprint, because as I shared with you guys before, when we look at our form, our structure, all of us at the beginning, during conception, when the egg is first fertilized, we are all exactly the same. There is no difference. There is no blonde hair, black hair, blue eyes, green eyes, brown skin, whatever skins. We are all exactly the same because stem cells are uncommitted. Stem cells are uncommitted cells. So the billions and billions of cells that we have are not yet identified or classified to form any specific part of our body. Every one of our cells has those 46 chromosomes. So every cell has 46 chromosomes. And those chromosomes, because they carry the genetic structure, are responsible then for creating our blueprint. And our blueprint is really our DNA. So the DNA, and actually let's go to the next slide. Look at this. So the DNA, each of these strands represents a combination, and that combination within this cell identifies which cell is going to be used for eyes or for muscles or for hair or for bone or for skin, right? So one of these combinations, as a result of this, pairing from mom and dad, one from mom, one from dad, pairing of these 46 when it's finished creates our DNA. And based on these combinations, the cell or part of the cell is going to be turned on, or part of it's going to be turned off. If you got blue eyes, then it may be that both are turned on. If you've got brown eyes, it may be one is turned on, one is turned off. If you've got hazel eyes or green eyes, maybe both are turned off. But whichever cell or whichever gene is structured for muscle or bone or hair or whatever it is, the state of that gene causes that outcome. It's even defined in the structures how tall you're going to be. Now, of course, environmentally, we can change that by doing things we're not supposed to, like, excuse me, an 8-year-old lifting weights, 100-pound weights or something like that. It affects bone definition and bone structure. But if we allow the DNA to manifest itself based on the blueprint structure, then we have a certain eye color, certain hair color, certain height, certain weight, all of that. And so these cells, the chromosomes, the cells, the genes, and all of those are structurally the blueprint for what we are going to become. So that gene, segment of the DNA that contains a chemical blueprint for manufacturing a particular protein. Excuse me, if you remember, I'm sorry. Sweet tea cures everything. So if you remember from Dr. Lipton, he said that if you take a stem cell, because a stem cell is not structured or not categorized for any particular function yet, then the only thing that differentiates one stem cell from another is the chemical environment that it's introduced to. So our DNA is a response to a particular cell or a particular part of a cell being turned on by some chemical introduction, right? So since, again, and I'll just do it this way, if there are, let's say that our body is only structured into, let me do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts. So I've got, and I'll say, so I've got 36 cells. And within those 36 cells, every cell has those 46 chromosomes. So if I take the first 6 cells that I'm going to use for my feet, then I will induce, or I shouldn't say I will, but the chemistry associated with that nuclear fusion causes the chemicals associated with those cells to have the blueprint and turn on the DNA structures that will create feet and ankle and toes. The next 6 cells may be from the knees up through the waist, and those are going to have chemicals associated with turning on those DNA structures to create your body structure. And then 6 more for arms, and 6 more for neck, and 6 more for head. So every part of the body, those cells are turned on by the genes to determine what structure it's going to create or which role it's going to play in the development of a person or an animal or plant. So with that, we grow, our bodies actually, again, the blueprint is already there. And it likens itself again to the idea that when you go to a predetermined community, right? One of those housing areas where all of the houses, 3 of the houses all look alike, they just separate them, the other 3 look alike, and you continue. And if you go through the community, every house looks like another house. They're just separated so they don't look like they're duplicates. Well, when you go in and you walk into the real estate office or whatever it is, they show you the model of the home. They show you the model, right? And that model effectively says, this is what this house is going to look like. Unless you pay a whole lot of money, your house is going to look like what's on this blueprint. And the builder or contractor, whomever they are, will take that blueprint and that's what you get. So each of us has a predetermined blueprint based on our cells and DNA structure, and that's who we become. So again, it's already defined that we're going to be 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot, 7 foot. Already determined the color of hair, color of eyes. And very seldom, if ever, unless they are genetically manipulated, is that going to change. So, but the body looks at, as with anything else, where do we start from? What are the most critical areas? And then from those critical areas, how do we expand? So notice proximodistal sequence, the developmental principle that growth occurs from the most interior parts to the body outward. So the heart, right? And then you have your central nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord, right? So those things that are the most significant parts to growth, development, and even life are the first things that occur. And then from there is developed the peripheral nervous system. So we start to create this connection with the spinal cord to the rest of the body. So your shell or your internal body, and arms are formed first. Then the fingers grow. Your feet are formed, then the toes grow. So all of it goes from the most interior and works outward to what the complete blueprint represents. Now, the cephalocaudal sequence is simply that we start in sequence from head to toe, because the brain is going to be the function that defines our neural pathways so that everything gets the signals and the chemicals necessary in order for it to form. If that sequence falters, which it sometimes does, then someone may have 6 toes instead of 5. Someone may have ill-deformed feet or miss a leg or an arm or something like that. But the blueprint is supposed to be structured so that everything happens in sequence. If you've ever done project management, then you know that some things cannot happen until something has occurred before. And in other instances, you can have things happening simultaneously. Well, all of this in the DNA structure has already been predetermined. And so unless we inject drugs or something happens biologically or chemically in the creation, the embryonic and fetal stage, then the outcome should be directly representative of what was shown in the blueprint. And you end up, again, 4 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet, blah, blah, blah. Your weight is even predetermined. All of that's predetermined. And of course, as human beings, we can cause that to fluctuate rapidly. All right, but the idea is we start with the areas that are going to control in the primary areas, because even the heart beat and our breathing is controlled by the brain and the spinal cord. And the part that connects the brain to the spinal cord is the brain stem. And the brain stem, that connection point, is responsible for heartbeat, heart rate, and breathing. So life, primary existence, our primal needs for existence are part of the first things formed. Then mass to specific. So your hand or your arms, you know, the large structures are there, but then for you to have more discrete movement, then the fingers and toes come last. But they're all connected, because even if you were to take, matter of fact, you can do it. If you take your middle finger and bend it forward, and if you look at the inside of your arm, you will see the muscles change the nature. So absolutely everything is connected from the tip of the finger back. So the connections are made until they get to the distinct part, which is the micro part. And then so that you have senses that are connected throughout the rest of the body. Here's one. Type into the chat room. How can you guarantee that if you're online and you're buying some shoes, how can you guarantee your shoe size? What can you use to guarantee your shoe size? Now, I'm presupposing you've never bought shoes, so you can't take some shoes that you have. You have to use something else that will absolutely identify your shoe size. Without measuring your foot. There's something else. You guys are trying to make this too easy. Okay. All right, so let's go back. Here's your shoe size. From your wrist to your elbow. That length, unless you've had some developmental issues, the length from your elbow to your wrist is your shoe size. Andrew's thinking, let me get a shoe. All right. So if your shoe is the exact size that you wear.
Oh man, I'd have some really big feet if that was true.
Yeah. So, but it's it. So if you take your shoe, if it's the right size, and you put from your wrist to your elbow, your shoe will fit right in between there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just tried it, you're right.
Yeah.
But wait, my foot's not that big. It's my shoe that's that big.
Okay, but your shoe, sometimes we buy shoes to be a little bit larger. But if you want the exact size from your wrist to your elbow, on the inside, not the outside, so you don't go to the elbow joint, but go from the bend in the wrist to your elbow to your wrist, that's your shoe size.
Yeah,
Right,
you're
so
actually right.
Yeah. So the body is already structured, right? That it has relationships. So there are things, again, if you have headaches, there are points on your hands or your feet that I can use reflexology, and I can massage points on your hand and feet because everything is interconnected, that will relieve your headache. Right? So that's the idea. So when we look at this structure, this blueprint, it's interconnected. It is the largest and most complex highway that you will ever travel on. Right? So that's the idea. So building from mass to specific sequence, it goes from the outer to do all of the connecting points to make sure that that discrete function travels all the way back through any area of the body, back to the brain for recognition. Okay. So from week 9 to birth, the fetal stage. Now this stage is absolutely a critical, and all of the weeks are, but generally for twins, a full term pregnancy is around 36 weeks. For a full term individual single child, it's around 42 weeks. So week 9 to birth, there are a lot of things. That's where all of these refinements and the extensions happen, where our bones start to extend, all of those things. What has been found is that for some pregnancies, if a woman is administered a particular drug prior to the 9th week, because as it shows here, this is when these lasting 7 months, physical refinements, massive growth, and the development of the brain. So if that same drug is administered prior to week 9, it can cause issues with every one of these functions, because the blueprint is being turned on to administer the chemicals associated with those areas for that to happen. You can give the same chemical after week 9, and it has absolutely no impact on growth or physical refinements.
There was
Right?
there
Yes.
was one drug in the 60s that a lot of pregnant women were given, and they were born with babies that had limbs that were misformed. I think it starts with, it's like, oh,
Actually, I know which, I can't think of it either. I know exactly which one you're talking about, but that was it. If they gave them that drug prior to week 8 or week 9, then children were born with missing limbs. If they gave them the exact same drug after week 9, it posed no issues. So what they presupposed was that prior to week 9, that drug was like an inhibitor to turning on certain segments of those cells and the gene structures. And so now, without them turning on as they were supposed to, the information for limbs didn't happen. So they would be born without certain limbs or with none. So yeah, it is that critical. And
So
each week, absolutely every week of the fetal cycle, from embryonic to fetal stage, every week and every day, there's a different signature that is turned on or off that determines your rate of development and the outcome of what those signatures represent. Yes, Serene?
Oh, I was gonna ask, so does it affects you the most if you took drugs towards the end of the pregnancy?
No, drugs will affect you all the way through the pregnancy. But for certain areas, right, because your physical refinements, right, so that's the feelings, the extension, the bone structure, all of those for those really critical things. How long is your arm going to be? How long are your fingers right? So all of those signatures tend to happen after the 8th week. But prior to the 8th week, all of those other things, heart, the structure. I remember we said we go from the interior to the outerior, or not the exterior. So the interior things are most affected during the first 8 weeks. Even to the point of determining whether or not biologically you will be a boy or a girl.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if someone were to have like, some sort of a disability or mental affliction like bipolar disorder or something like that, and would it be like, would they have to get off their medication in order to like for them to carry on with a pregnancy, or would they have to stop the medication and risk their mental health?
Well, the medication would be a factor that, and I would leave this to, their doctor, but dependent on the severity of the condition, they may say that for the first 8 weeks or so that they would want to diminish that drug or how much they're administering. They may put them on a lighter version of it. Or in some instances, they do recommend, if you can deal with this in another way, to minimize the introduction of that drug into the system. Because remember, especially for not so much dad, but mom, that the entire life cycle of the child is being fed and nurtured by the bloodstream of the carrier, which is mom. So anything that she ingests or smokes or smells or whatever becomes a part of her body, and that gets transferred to the embryo.
Okay. So do you think that it would affect like the brain development of the child?
Yeah, it could. I mean, because think a child can be born a crack addict. A child can be born an alcoholic, right? So those drugs, dependent on how they impact those signatures during that period of time, could theoretically also cause a problem with whether those signatures were turned on or off. And if it's supposed to be turned on and it doesn't, then it could cause brain damage. It could cause limb formation. It could cause heart damage. Any of those things. I don't know specifically what a drug for bipolarism may be less severe than one for schizophrenia, may be less severe than one for dissociative identity disorder. So it depends on the nature of the drug and what the side effects cause. But any of them that are not naturally produced or exceeds a certain limit could have an impact on the embryo.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yep. Let's see. How come then people have different ratios? Explain that, Abby. I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you were talking about how that's our shoe size and everything, and how our body's made up. My friends have done this multiple times because we found it interesting. Our different heights. I have the same like length. My legs are the same as my friends, but my arms are significantly shorter than theirs.
Okay.
So I was just wondering why people have like different ratios like that, even though our legs are the same and we have similar torsos. My arms are a lot shorter.
Yep, blueprint. It doesn't end there. Again, building from the inside to the outside, all of it is signature dependent, right? And so each signature is as a result of a chemical injection that's already predetermined as a result of your blueprint. And so if you look at the majority of 7-footers, or even people who are 6'8", 6'10", their arms their body weight, their torso tends to be almost the same as someone who's 6 feet. But from their waist down, they've got 9,000 feet legs, right? So it just depends on how that signature manifested itself during the blueprint. And so for you, fortunately or unfortunately, when the arms were being formed, you got the necessary chemical induction for arm length, but you may not have gotten as much as the person who has longer arms. Because you'll see some people who have, as you said, your arms may be shorter, but if you look at the average, there's probably an average length for that particular height. But you will have some people whose arms are much longer than those that are average. And all of it as a result of how much chemical was transmitted during the signature cycle. And that's simply the simplest answer. Okay, so as you look at the first system that is created is the brain and the spinal cord. That's the very first system that is created. Now, as I shared before, the prefrontal cortex, the front area of the brain, is where all of our executive functions manifest themselves. For women, the prefrontal cortex does not mature until around age 23. For men, prefrontal cortex does not mature until around the age of 25. However, if you think of the nature of our experiences and learning and capability, the blueprint is actually structuring the brain and the spinal cord. So those are as a result of an external program that's being run to create those two at one system, that primary system. And then at some point, control is passed over to the brain, because the brain now manages the peripheral nervous system, which allows for the arms and legs and toes and fingers and all of those to be connected. Because all of the connections that happen in our body are neural pathways. All of our senses and those connections are as a result of neural pathways that go from the brain to your big toe. So the blueprint is an external control function that allows the primary system to be formed, brain, spinal cord. And then after that, once the peripheral nervous system starts to develop, but the peripheral nervous system are connections. Those are links to the rest of our body, external to the brain and the spinal cord. So the function of the brain has to be such that it allows for those billions of sensory contact points across the body to be formed and connected. So by the time you're 9 months, you've probably got 4 billion cells or neurons in just the brain. So just before birth, because now not only do you have all of the connecting points within the body, you now are going to be experiencing external influences that are also going to foster the things that you recognize as pain or not painful happiness from external influences from your caregivers, right? So the brain becomes, and for those who've never seen this before, if you take your brain, if you could take this series, what looks like intestines, if you were to take those and flatten it out, your brain would be about 3 feet long. But in order to fit within this protective structure, it's scrunched. Now, the other thing that it does is it creates much greater connectivity, because as you know, the longer a path, then the more likely signal loss can occur. So being in a contained space actually creates signal transfer, so there's less loss of information. Now, the brain is really the only area of the body that is not protected by a skeletal structure. The brain is fully encased in liquid. So even though you have a skull, it is not a skeletal structure that protects the brain. It's liquid, which is one of the reasons why people having concussions, it creates so much damage to the brain, because the brain actually moves. And since it moves in the gel, if it pushes too hard up against this cranial structure, then it causes the brain to swell. And that swelling can cause damage. And long periods of swelling can cause loss of brain function. So that's the only area. And then, of course, here is the cerebellum. And this area in here is where the brainstem is. That's where the spinal cord gets connected to the brain. So everything from the peripheral nervous system goes back through the spinal cord. Spinal cord transmits those neural signals to the brain. The brain commits those to memory and interprets them. And then sends the signal back out to the hand and say, yep, that is burning, take it off. But that's what happens with the brain. So the first trimester, those first 3 months, are really critical. And they're exceptionally critical because one of the 3 Lungman segments into which pregnancy is divided. So it's those certain signals, those certain signatures for the creation of the brain, or the spinal cord, or the heart, establishing heartbeat. All of those things happen in the first 3 months. And that's why someone who has had difficulty with pregnancies tend not to let anyone know that they're pregnant until after the first trimester. Because after the first trimester, there's a much higher probability that the pregnancy will go through its full term. The first part is when the formation of all of those pieces and parts really starts to happen. The blueprint is first structured, and that's when the most damage can also happen. Now, it doesn't mean that the second and third can't have damage, but the first is that creation. If the signals there get screwed up, then it's a high likelihood that there will be difficulty with the pregnancy. Hormones, chemical substances released in the bloodstream that target and change organs and tissues. And like I said before, the stem cells are uncommitted cells. They have no purpose other than to be used as a signature event in your being created. And the way that they are defined, and it is so beautiful to me, and and this is a quick share, but literally during one of the phases, generally around those first few weeks, those billions of cells, there is a chemical signal, there's a stimulation, and those cells are aligned. The brain actually aligns those cells into segments. And then it changes the composition of each of those layers. And one layer may be muscle, one may be bone, one may be hair. And what is really amazing to me is that we each have, during that formation, there is a bed. And when I say a bed, I'm talking a lake bed, pond bed, river bed, whatever it is, of cilia. So it's like hair. And that hair does not move until it is time for these cells to be defined. Once they're defined, every one of these moves in the same direction. They start twirling. And when they twirl, the twirling forces certain cells to be placed in layer 1, certain cells in layer 2, and certain cells in layer 3. After that's done, they stop. And then the chemical substances associated with each of these gets induced, and then you have no longer stem cells, but the cells that actually create the structures that we are. It is absolutely amazing. Okay, and then of course, miscarriages tend to happen during the first trimester. So naturally occurring loss of a pregnancy or death of the fetus. Now that can be as a result of bodily abuse. It could be drugs, pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical. It can be as a result of physical pressures. It can also be mental pressure. But stress and anxiety, remember, stress and anxiety disallows the function of the body to operate normally, which means blood flow and oxygen and those things that are necessary for the body to function are diminished. So during the first trimester, if there's going to be a miscarriage, 90% or more of the time it's going to happen during the first trimester, not the second or third. Okay. All right. And so even if we think about that for 3 months, you've made it past that 9-month period that we were talking about, because there's 12 weeks. So with those 12 weeks, pretty much, unless you got a couple of extra days, the majority of the initial structure of the house is built. And then once the house is built, then, or at least the structure, then we go in and start putting the walls so we can define what's going to be the kitchen, the bathroom, right? So all of those happen after. So the question about drugs and the inducement of drugs, whether they are drugs for bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, whatever they are, that substance entering into mom's bloodstream, because everything that feeds that child is going to enter, if it enters into mom's bloodstream, then it's going to cross the placenta, the sac that's holding the embryo, and can harm the fetus. Now, we don't know to what degree in all instances, but we do know that addiction happens. A person who is on pharmaceutical or illegal drugs can cause the child to have the exact same symptoms and be addicted as well. Someone who smokes, because cigarette smokes enters into the oxygen stream. The oxygen is carried by the bloodstream. It enters into the fetus, and it can cause blindness. It can cause malformed limbs and body parts, and even the brain. So the sensitive period, the one that we were talking about, when the body structure is most vulnerable to damage by a teratogen, typically when the organ or process is rapidly developing or coming online, first trimester, right? And probably within the first 4 to 6 weeks. So probably the first month, month and a half is the most sensitive period because then the brain and the spinal cord are being formed, and those are the carriers for all of your senses, your emotions, everything that's going to happen within your body is occurring within that period. So usually after, again, the 9th week, if mom smokes, now it can cause problems, but it's less likely that it's going to lead to something that's going to cause either death or a severe disorder with the child. Now, it can happen after that. This is generally the period. So usually alcoholism, drug use, or something like that is going to be most evident during that first trimester, and generally the first month to a month and a half of the trimester. So as a result of those things, if during that sensitive period you introduce these things that could harm the fetus, then developmental disorders, some autism is caused as a result of that. It could be dyslexia, where the formation of the visual cortex now sees words backwards and doesn't necessarily make loss of eye function, muscle disorder. So all of these things, which can lead to genetic predispositions, become or can manifest themselves as developmental disorders.
I had a question.
So, yes, go right ahead.
Is it possible to check your is it possible to check your DNA and see like, oh, your kid's gonna have this if you have a baby, or they're gonna have this disease?
Yeah, they actually do that. For some, especially mothers who are, or pregnant women who are going to be mothers, if it goes through the full cycle. Generally, if they're over 36, they will take some of the fluid, and they'll take the fluid, and they can actually look at the DNA and presuppose if they're going to be certain issues.
That's only after 36 though?
I'm sorry?
That's only after, sorry, I interrupted you, but is that only after 36?
Well, that's generally mostly when they would do it, but no, you can do it before then, right? Because they can take the, what is it, embryonic fluid or something like that. But they take that fluid, and since the fluid is a chromosomal liquid, it carries the DNA. And since every cell has your chromosomes, all 46 in it, they can look at that and partially determine not with a 100% certainty, but pretty certain that there's going to be a developmental disorder. Now, the reason that trying to do it before then, again, you could do it before then, but if there are sensitive issues during the pregnancy, you know, those can happen after becoming pregnant, right? Because you can induce other things in there, but there are DNA samples that you can do now. It's which field of medicine? I can't think of which one, but there is one, because I know it happens over at the Innova facility that I use. They could take a DNA sample right now and tell you whether you have a high probability for diabetes, blood pressure, all of those, just based on your DNA signatures. Now, speaking of that, as Dr. Lipton indicated, the field of epigenetics says that simply because you have a signature, it doesn't mean the signature will manifest itself, right? So my dad had high blood pressure, but he had it maybe because of genetics or maybe because he smoked his entire life. But because 50% of his DNA transferred to me, then there was a genetic possibility that I would have high blood pressure. But if I realize that, then I cannot smoke, which I've never done. I cannot do those kinds of things. I can exercise, eat well, that will limit the possibility of that signature manifesting itself. Yeah, but yeah, you can do that even before being pregnant or anything, because it shows you what your DNA strands most likely promote, right? But remember again, that unless you're an identical twin, you know, your dad may have high blood pressure, but your mom not. You're only getting 50% of your dad and 50% of mom. So that makes it a 25% chance that you could theoretically have high blood pressure or not.
Does it matter if like male or female? Like, does it
No.
matter which one's more dominant?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. The dominance is more for traits, right? And so, but if you have the gene, then the gene, if you're identical, you know, and mom and dad have the high blood pressure trait, then it's highly likely that you're going to have a signature high blood pressure. But if dad has it and he has the dominant gene, it doesn't necessarily mean that because he has the dominant gene pretty much determines, you know, male, female kind of thing, not so much the trait. Yeah, because that's transferred from both equally.
Can I add something?
Prodigens, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Aaron.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. So it kind of answers a little, or add on to what you were saying in response to Serene, because I just went through this with my baby, because I turned 35 during this last pregnancy. And I was really surprised because my girls are 10 and 14, so it had been a while since I'd gone through some of the blood testing and whatnot that they do for pregnancy. But nowadays, they even tell you if you want to know the gender, you can even know it just by getting your blood draw done between, it's usually around like 11 weeks, but they do so many different blood draws, but especially testing for stuff like Down syndrome. They usually test that one regardless. But there's a lot of blood tests they do for everybody. So if you're thinking about for whenever, if you decide to become a mom, then like there is a lot that you're going to get tested for, but also they do a lot of testing for like Tay-Sachs, or I don't know if I pronounce that right. If you come from like Jewish descent in particular, and stuff like that. So
or sickle cell if you're African American.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, now I have kids in the 30s.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of things that they can do now because of neuroscience and because of increases in not only technology, but understanding of DNA structures, that, you know, you can get pretty much any answer that you need. Now, remember, nothing is 100%, but they can even give you the percentage of certainty that a particular signature is going to be transferred. All right. Okay. So teratogens, you know, because they are introduced into the bloodstream and they cross the placental walls, and anything that crosses the placental wall is going to be fed into the child, into the embryo and the fetus. So can affect the developing brain through pregnancy, because if it's during that initial stage, right, that's when the brain is first being formed. So all of those signatures are being impacted. And as we know, with the use of neurons and neural structures, that the cell body contains information that gets transferred through the neural pathways. Well, if something that's supposed to be transferred gets inhibited, then it doesn't happen, and that signature does not manifest itself. Or there can also be too much, right? Because you've seen, and it could be the wrong drug, which is why we know biologically that homosexuality, male or female, is a biological event, can be a biological event. It doesn't mean that some people can't still choose external to biology, but it does mean that there are real cases when the biology can construct itself that instead of that particular period of time, the XY genes, when it's supposed to identify a boy or a male, estrogen gets, because the right gene didn't turn on, and instead of getting testosterone, there's estrogen. And so with estrogen, a boy could feel more as a female than he does as a male. Or a female could feel more as a male than a female, because once the chemicals are structured for a particular gender, then the brain conforms to that particular reality. So if estrogen is the primary, and there's generally 2 periods when you get that injection of that particular hormone. Generally, it's between the 4th and 8th week, which is why I think Aaron said that around the 10th or 11th week, they can tell you the sex, right? Because now that has been pretty much defined. But during puberty, you generally get the last big shot or injection of either estrogen or testosterone, which then forms even greater cognitive affinity toward being male or female. There is one, and I can't remember where it is. I'll try to look it up. But there's one place in the world that we're currently aware of. But until around between the age of 8 and 11, 30 to 60, and I know this is a large spread, but I can't remember if it's 30% or 60% of the children born in that village, they don't know if they are male or female until around the age of 8, 9, 10, or 11. Because as I said before, when we are first created prior to that 11th week, right, males and females have the exact same extremity. So if the injection during the embryonic stage is testosterone related, then that extremity becomes a penis. If it is estrogen related, then it becomes a clitoris. But both males, both genders have the exact same extremity, and then the chemical composition determines whether you will be male or female based on that XY chromosome or XX. Well, in that particular village, for some reason, until they get the second injection of testosterone or estrogen, and you guys know this, if you take a child and from the waist up until around the age of 8, boys and girls look exactly the same, right? There's no hair and body formation or anything like that. So these injections actually promote, and they promote not only physically, but cognitively, whether your gender is male or female. So as I said before, smoking and alcohol can cause serious defects in children. And Aaron, you have a cute baby, by the way. A cluster of birth defects caused by the most alcohol consumption, because it enters the bloodstream and then crosses the placental wall, which means it is being fed to the child. Okay, so the long shadow of prenatal stress. prenatal depression. There's prenatal depression and this postpartum depression, right? So again, the chemical imbalance that is associated with being pregnant. I mean, the reality is, you know, your body, and I don't know this from, you know, my own experience, but I know that the changes my wife went through, you know, with the twins, there are significant changes in the body that really who's prepared for, right? As I asked you guys before, you know, the most excruciating pain external to something externally generated that a person can experience is a mother having a child. I mean, if they don't get the what is it, the Demerol or whatever it is.
Epidural.
Epidural.
Yeah, yeah. So they don't get that. I mean, that's pain, but it's pain that's not remembered because a lot of you have brothers and sisters. So if the pain was that great that you remembered it, you may be an only child. So some people can deal with those changes better than others. And then some, as a result of the chemical imbalance after having a child, can go through postpartum depression and additional things, unless, you know, again, the body reaches some form of balance that allows this association to be dominant and the chemical imbalance to be diminished. So fetal programming research, new research discipline exploring the impact of traumatic pregnancy events and stress on producing low birth weight, obesity, or long-term physical problems, right? So again, all of these things, trauma, remember, trauma affects the bloodstream and oxygen flow. So if that's the case, then that means that trauma can also be a stress condition that is induced and sent to the child. And as a result, now that child ends up with the same traumatic experiences that the mom experienced. And that's the difficulty. All right. Down syndrome, as I said, usually, if not always, Down syndrome is a function of there being 47 chromosomes instead of 46. Very seldom, if ever, if there are only 46 chromosomes, will you see an outcome related to Down syndrome. If the 47th, and that's how they can measure serine with your fluid measurement, they can check the chemical state of that, and as a result, determine if there is only 23 pairs, or whether there are 23 pairs and one additional chromosome. Usually the 47th identifies most likely that there's going to be an impact entitled Down syndrome. Most common chromosomal abnormality causing intellectual disability, susceptibility to heart disease, other health problems, and distinctive physical characteristics. It is unfortunate and it is really sad, but children who have Down syndrome if they make it to 20 years old, they're doing really well. Usually it is short-lived. And I don't mean to put anybody into a bad state, but that's the reality. So some of the disorders that can manifest themselves, single gene disorder. So an illness caused by a single gene. So either with this pairing between mom and dad, right? So if, I'm going back quickly, if these are the signatures of the gene pairings, so that you have, 23 from mom, 23 from dad, but those genes are mapped and paired. And as a result of that pairing, you then end up with the blueprint for who you are. However, sometimes, let's say gene pairing number 2. So instead of getting these full length DNA strands, something happened and this one gene was halved, right? So you don't get the full information from that gene. Well, it's only this one gene that's maybe from mom or dad, whomever it's from. But as a result of that, the illness associated with it can be identified by a particular gene. If it is a dominant disorder, then it's that a child gets by inheriting one copy of the abnormal gene that causes the disorder. So the single gene for a single gene disorder is simply as a result of either mom or dad. Dominant disorder, whichever is the dominant gene, that's the one that is most likely will cause a disorder because it is a dominant presence in the DNA structure or signature. Recessive disorder, an illness that gets a child, or an illness that a child gets by inheriting 2 copies of the abnormal gene that causes the disorder. So now it is more likely that the disorder will occur, especially if you have both mom and dad's genes that have this signature. There's one blood disorder that I'm aware of. Let's see. Oh, and we were talking about it before, whether it's Tay-Sachs or whether it's sickle cell or even some blood disorders. If both parents have the exact same blood disorder, then it's highly recommended that they don't have children, right? Because the combination of both parents, it is a higher probability, much higher probability that there will be a recessive gene disorder, because now both parents carry it, which means that there's a higher, like almost a 100% likelihood that they're going to transfer that gene, right? Sex-linked single gene disorder, carried on the mother's X chromosome, because mom is the one who determines whether it's going to be a boy or girl, not dad. Typically leaves the female offspring unaffected, but has a 50-50 chance of striking each male child, right? Because again, daughters are XX and sons are XY. So if the X chromosome is the one that has the dominance of the illness, then the X is the one that gets transferred to the male child because the other chromosome is Y. And so 50-50 chance that the X overshadows the Y, and the male child ends up with sex-linked single gene disorder.
Is it true that your gene, like, if if your parents had green eyes and then you weren't born with green eyes, then it skips a generation, and then your kids will have them?
It can.
Okay.
And it's not a truism that your kids will have it, right? But it tends to indicate that the gene, just like you transfer to your children, right? Certain genes. Well, your grandparents passed on certain genes to your mom or dad. Well, dependent on the representation of the signature transferred, then one becomes dominant, one becomes recessive. So for your parents, your grandparents may have had hazel green eyes, but it wasn't shared through the child. But that means that at least the gene still carries that signature. It just didn't get turned on. So when you have children, it may get turned on, and then your child could theoretically have those hazel green eyes. Yeah. Because they also say that twins tend to skip a generation. There's no guarantee to that, but and I really have no idea why that happens. But my brother has twin boys, and I have fraternal twins. So, but neither of our parents were twins. Our grandparents were. Yeah, so interesting. All right. Oh, that's why it won't scroll. The end of chapter 2. All right. So we are close, but what I want to do so that we don't get behind too far, and I don't think we're too far behind, is I at least want to introduce chapter 3. Once I introduce chapter 3, we will then get more deeply into it on Thursday. But let me at least bring it up. That's chapter 1. Let's get that one out of there. We'll bring it up and at least introduce it so that you can be prepared for what we're going to discuss. And let's see, chapter 3. Okay, so now physical and cognitive development in infants and toddlers. So we're sort of moving from the embryonic fetal first stage child, And we're going to move into now more of the conditioning and influence levels associated with childhood. So I'll at least cover this part. And after I cover this part, we'll make, oh, sorry, didn't mean to close it. After we cover this part, this will be all that we cover today. And then we'll jump into the other stuff on Thursday. Okay, so as we were talking about, the neural pathways become effectively our roadmap for all of our feelings and all of our sensibilities. So we have 5 external senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, blah. And then there are another 22 to 23 internal senses. But all of those, sort of like your balance, right? All of those are internal. The external ones are the ones that we not only use to integrate with the external world, but we also have pathways internal that allow our body to sort of signal to other parts of the body what's going on. So if you stump your toe, you know, cognitively, you can make sense of what happened and what caused that and not to repeat it again. Well, the neuron, this would be the structure of a neuron. So the structure of a neuron is this. There is now it's not the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex uses the information transferred, but the axon, dendrites, synapse, synaptogenesis, and even some that aren't up there, terminal buttons and myelin sheath. So I'll present those to you, and then you can make sense of those.
Professor, we can't see the shared screen right now. Is
I hate
that?
it when that happens. Okay, let me see. Hopefully I didn't close it. Let me see. Okay, thank you, because, oh yeah, because I'm not seeing my selection. Let me see. Let me get back to where I was. Let's see. Zoom. Let's see. Let's start it again. Okay, I know how to get there. All right, let's do this. Now we're back. All right, thank you, because otherwise I would have gone on just like you were there. Okay, good now? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna do it this way. Okay, so let's get rid of this. All right, so here is, and if you took 200, you'll recognize this, I think. So this is Dallas Fort Worth Airport. And this is Dulles Airport. IAD. Okay, so what if I were to ask you some of the attributes or some of the things that you associate or see at an airport? What would you offer?
Airplanes.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's put an airplane there.
People?
All right. Okay, cool. Okay, so I got people.
Suitcases.
Okay, suitcases. And what do suitcases carry?
Their stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to put needs. So the things that we need whenever we go somewhere, generally we put in our backpack, suitcase, purse, whatever, right? Okay, now, where are the planes? I mean, do you walk into Dulles and just get on the plane? Where do you have to go to get on the plane?
Terminal?
Cool, okay. So now we've got all of the pieces that we need to understand a neuron. All right, so first, people are not at the airport, they have to come to the airport. So they come to the airport, but then before they can get to the plane, they have to go through security. So security makes sure that the people or information that I want to get somewhere is the right information, right? Because I want to protect what's going in and coming out. So on a neuron, the place that makes sure or receives the information is called the dendrite. The dendrites, and I'll show you here. Dendrites are the part of the neuron that receives information. So no neuron, all neurons are independent, right? So there are no, multiple cell neurons. Each neuron is independent. So in order for one neuron to talk to another neuron, the neuron has to send information to be received. And the receiving neuron has to accept that information. If it doesn't, then that information can't enter. So if we go back to the airport, if these people don't pass the test and say that these are the right people, we can even say, them having their passport or something, if they don't have the correct information identifying them, then you can't go into the airport. Once you get into the airport, now I have to go through a waiting period before I can get on the plane. So the people are there, but they've got to check in, check their baggage, go into the waiting area until the plane's ready to be boarded. Well, that's the same thing that's happening here. The cell body is the internal airport. So the information comes in, and then it is housed or kept here in the cell body. The cell body holds the information until it gets another neuron that says, I need that information. If it doesn't get that signal, then the information stays here. Well, if the information gets there, or if the information is requested, then you get on the train, or at the Dulles Airport, the people mover. You get on the people mover, and then it transports you to the terminal. All right, so these transports are called exons. So the exons are what transfer the information from the cell body to the terminal. In the picture, these are exons. So there are multiple exons that will get us from the cell body to the terminal. And these, by the way, that I'm circling here, are called terminal buttons. So we get the information in, we store it till we need it. Once it's ready to be loaded, we transfer it to the terminal, and it loads the information on the terminal. And then, as a result, the terminal allows for transfer from this airport to the other one, and this being another neuron. And that's really how it worked, guys. That's as simple as I can make it, right? So the thing that I want to make sure, though, because let's say that this people mover, for some reason, had open seating. So now open seating, if it hits a big bump, then some of the people could fall out. Well, we don't want them to fall out. So what we do is we put a protective shield around the people mover so that it keeps the people on the bus or inside the train. Well, that's your myelin sheath. Myelin sheath is a coating around the axons that protect the information so that it doesn't leak out and you lose the integrity of the information. It is not on all axons. It is only on certain axons. And I would presuppose that those axons are the ones, i.e. when you get in an emergency situation, you don't need for information to be filtered. You need for it to go straight through without stopping at security, straight through. There are instances when your body needs to respond immediately. For instance, if you touch a hot pot and it has boiling water, this goes to the spinal cord, that part of the central nervous system. The spinal cord will send the information to the brain, but it takes over on its own and says, don't wait for the brain, take your hand off of the pot. Right? So in that instance, we need more immediacy. So myelin sheath coats the axons so that we don't lose the information that's being transferred. And that's what's happening with this. Now, the space between the neurons is called the synapse. So the synapse is the gap between a terminal button on the sending neuron and the dendrites of the receiving neuron. Within that gap, one thing happens. And this is where we will close this part out. I have this neuron and I have this neuron. Well, once it's sort of like a cell phone. So you got your cell phone and you want to make a call to somebody else, to a receiving cell phone. Well, if they don't answer the call or pick it up, then what you have to share with them never gets shared. So the sending neurons sends out neurotransmitters, chemical pieces of information. That information gets flooded into the synapse. Now, let's say that this transfer medium is shaped like this. The receiving says, in order for me to receive that, I have to have a shape that allows it to bed, which means effectively the passcode is there. If the passcode is there, then the neurotransmitters are sent into the receiving neuron. If the shape does not allow that, then they get blocked. Once the receiving neuron gets all of the information that it needs, let's say just this portion, then what the sending neuron will do is reopen and bring all of the unused information back in. All of the neurotransmitters, those chemical signals, it brings it back in for the next transmission. And that's how we transfer information across this. Synaptogenesis simply says that as a result of a new neuron location, we create a new pathway, genesis, starting from the beginning. All right, so two things, and this will close us out. If you have, for instance, a amphetamine, cocaine, crack cocaine, something like that, then what happens is the sending neuron doesn't get to close. It stays, it closes. So since it closes, then all of the leftover stuff can't get back in. So it stays in the synapse. So the receiving neuron gets more than it needs. So you get an elevated high. Now, if it's a depressant, then this stays open and these close off. So now instead of getting the signals that you need, they can't get in there. So you aren't getting the neurotransmitter, the chemical information. And this one brings them back in because it thinks that this has gotten all it needs. This one didn't get what it needed. So of course, now you can't change states. All right. So that's the idea about neurons and the pathways used for neurotransmission. And there are billions and billions and billions of these in our bodies. So with that, we will stop there, and we will start on Thursday with neural pruning, brain plasticity, and more things as it affects childhood. All right, so any questions, guys? Okay. All right, so if you don't have any questions, have a great day. I will see you on Thursday. If you do have a question that you'd like to have addressed, you can remain on, and I will stay on to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you,
Welcome. Have a great
Professor.
day.
Thank you.
Hey, Professor.
And
Thank
Megan,
you.
Megan, I don't know if you've
Thank
seen
you,
it, but I
Professor.
absolutely loved your story. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much. But I've read it twice. So I loved it. Okay. All right, guys, have a great day. Aaron, take care of that wonderful baby. Hi, Abby. Did you have a question?
Yeah, are we allowed to use any of what we learned today on our paper to like
Oh,
add to it?
absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Would I be allowed to talk about like, so my brother has autism and a few other things. Would I be able to apply the theories and what we learned to him and say how that shaped me, like growing up around
Yeah,
him and being more impulsive?
that would be perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
Even though
because-
it's technically not me, that's
No, but it has an influence on you,
okay.
right? Your need to support him, your need for some isolation, because sometimes, you know, the needs are greater than you're able to manage. And so that has an impact on you, right? So a lot of who you are is as a result of the environment that you've been introduced into. So yeah, so I wouldn't make the whole paper about him, but I would make the paper about what kind of impacts and influences had on how you become the person that you are as a result of that. Yeah, absolutely. That would be perfect.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Professor,
Yes.
in this paper, are we allowed to use like the words like I, am, you, like pretty
Yeah,
much?
you can use first and second person in this one because it really is about your experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said, I know you said 2 minimum page. Is it 1.5 page or 2 pages fully minimum?
1.5 is really the minimum, but I find it difficult to express stuff in 1.5, especially when it's double spaced and 11-point font. You know, that's a couple of paragraphs. But if you can do it in a couple of paragraphs, that's fine. But if I can't understand it or appreciate it in a couple of paragraphs, then it's probably not going to get you the points that you want.
This paper is mostly about you just getting to know us and understanding for the class and what we are.
It's not, I have an appreciation for that, but it's more about me recognizing that you understand the application of what we're talking about. So if you can apply it to your own life, then it at least gives me an idea that you understand how those principles apply and how they're actually used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then you said we don't really have to use the principles, what we learned in slides to our paper.
No, someone asked about reference and citations. But I find that if you use a reference, citations, then it shows that you understand how those principles or theories apply to your life, right? So remember the rubric says 95 to 100 is if you use principles and theories to explain your story, then you get those points. If you don't have to use citations and references, but if you don't, then you drop down to the other ranges of grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too. You take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was missing in the first part of class. I was helping my mom move some stuff, and I had to run back to class. So did I miss anything in the first couple, like 5 minutes of class, or?
I don't think you missed that much, but again, I'm going to put the video out there so you'll have access to it.
Okay, and then the second thing is that I'm helping my mom get ready for her move back to England, and I'm not going to be able to get back to the internet, like back to my internet and post my essay this evening. Am I able to like post it at like 2 a.m. or something like that?
No, it's 11:59.
All right. So I guess I'll have to find a coffee shop or something like that to sit in and like post my essay.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that, the date is the date, but I've always told you guys, you can always post it early,
Yeah.
right? So the last day, because life happens, that's why I would never wait till the last day to try to get it in.
Yeah, that's fair. I just completely forgot about it like a couple days ago, and I've been writing it, and today I've just been trying to
Okay.
do some
Well,
stuff. So,
remember, something or anything is better than nothing.
yeah, I'll definitely
Okay.
get something in by at least 11.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Take care.